Thank you for joining this webinar today on this beautiful day here over in Europe from different territories, joined by Urs, who will introduce himself in a bit, and Joachim as well. My name is Frank Saunders here at Whatagraph. I'm the Senior Vice President looking after our client partnerships. We work with several thousands of brands and agencies from all around the world. And what we do is we aggregate a variety of data, marketing data, be that Google, Facebook, Snapchat, you name it, into a single interface to be able to see what's happening in the business, so from a sort of digital bird's eye view perspective. In this webinar, we're going to be covering about decoupling user data from social media, which is, I believe, a very interesting topic, specifically looking at where the world is going, Europe in particular, when it comes to GDPR. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to Urs.
Thank you very much, Frank, for hosting this fabulous event. Very delighted to be here and to have the opportunity to speak about this new topic. And so my personally is I'm an entrepreneur since more than 20 years. I started off with a degree in physics and went into consulting, and then very quickly went into becoming an entrepreneur in 97, 98 around voice over IP. And since then, once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. That's about me.
Fantastic. Pleasure to have you.
Excuse me?
Pleasure to have you.
Thank you a lot.
And Joachim?
Yes, hi. I'm Joachim Schwerin. I'm working for the European Commission as principal economist in the unit that deals with the digital transformation of industry, which is in the Director General responsible for the internal market, entrepreneurship, industry, and SMEs. I've been working the last 20 years on various topics, starting from industrial policy, competition policy, to access to finance, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises and startups. And now recently changed to the digital transformation of industry, where I'm responsible for developing the token economy in Europe, especially for our industrial ecosystems. Glad to be here and happy to talk about really not only business cases, but the fundamentals of what we are doing in terms of our European values and how we put that into policy and practice.
Fantastic. Behind the scenes, we're going to have Raphael, who has also joined us. For everybody out there joining us from Europe or wherever you are in the world, really, feel free to ask any questions that you may have here in the Zoom interface, or also in the DISEO app, where there's multiple questions already are coming in that we'll try and answer at the end as we progress through the webinar. So don't shy away. I believe this is going to be this fantastic topic. We have fantastic speakers here as well. So over just generally in terms of where Europe is moving, considering the values, Joachim, would be appreciated on your take sort of on that.
Thank you very much, Frank, also for the kind introduction, and happy to see also Urs here. I will be very brief because I think that we need to make the entrepreneurs talk and then take this from an interactive point of view and have your questions and answers. But I'll speak about maximum 10 minutes about topics I've just briefly mentioned. Starting point is what we have as projections for the future. You all know how the projections are for the development of the data economy globally, but also in Europe, in the European Union. We have a lot of prospections about development of data flows, of how big the market will be, etc., etc. In 2018, we made a projection to 2025, which I found interesting because in 2018, we saw that 80% of the data processing taking place in the European Union is on centralized platforms and 20% on decentralized ones or on smart connected devices. In 2025, it will be the opposite. It will be 20% centralized and 80% decentralized or on IoT or decentralized devices. Now that's the trajectory that we are dealing with. And of course, the system that we have at this very moment is focusing on the discussion on the centralized entities. But it is important to understand that our whole value system in Europe, and that's different from other parts of the world, I feel, is a bottom-up approach, is a decentralized approach. And you should not get lost in the details of what I will be saying or what we'll be discussing. The key point is that from our approach, we have taken over the last 10 years at least, a very consistent approach in all our policy making that is based around the same and identical values. And I compare that to other approaches without calling names, but we know that there are central solutions from a state perspective that are top-down, where technology is being used to monitor, to control people, to steer behavior. And we see that there are big tech solutions also that also take a top-down approach, which in my very personal opinion is equally undemocratic as the centralized state approach, because basically it means that entities that are not focusing on the interest of the individual are controlling of what happens with your data and your economic activities. Our approach is a bottom-up approach, and that emerged primarily after the last financial crisis, when we saw that we had all these problems in the banking sector, which is a sort of closed shop, which is of systemic relevance and where we had very little alternatives. 75% of financing of small and medium-sized enterprises and startups in Europe went through the banking sector, and that hasn't changed much. And we have been looking for decentralized activities, alternatives, which is why we looked at crowdfunding, fintech, and all the trajectory that we've gone through since. And that is where we realized that our governance model must change. Our governance model is not that we have 5 years' time to take a regulation or directive to fine-tune it, because we know that we deal with mature market with a few incumbents and we need to make sure that this fits, but we wanted to activate all the vibrant economic activity on a decentralized level, local, regional level, in order to activate those people to take their fate, their economic, social fate into their own hands. And this is the decentralization aspect. And this is very much rooted in everything that we then did also in terms of data. For example, the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, was mentioned. We adopted it 5 years ago, and it is in practice since 3 years. But it is not very much lived up to in certain quarters, to put it this way. And it might be interesting, although it's not our key topic perhaps today, to look at the GDPR, to look at the fundamentals. Because first of all, we define data in a very broad sense. Everything that is suited to identify an individual is relevant data. That can be a name or email address, that can be an IP address, that can everything that can track you down. This is data. And the data belongs to the individual, to the citizen or to the enterprise that generates the data. And this individual, whether it's a human being or a virtual entity, needs to give active consent for the use of your data, otherwise the use is illegal. And active consent means a written declaration which is at any point in time retractable. So that it's your free choice and remains your free choice that this data is being used. And we call this concept privacy by design. So we promote on that legal basis, which has then emerged into all our other areas as well, the principle that when you design a platform, when you design a business model, you need to include privacy by design so that this really decentralized element is respected. And in all the activities that we've taken since, and I just mentioned a few for those that have followed that and taken an interest, our digital strategy of February of last year, where we had our first data strategy and also our strategy on artificial intelligence, our SME strategy of last year, the digital finance strategy that, for example, led us into the area of crypto assets, where we have the first big global, I would say, regulation encompassing all crypto assets, the MiCA regulation, including stable coins and wherever, where we prohibit nothing, where we clearly list the rules of, if you want to do business in Europe, these are the rules, and we encourage you to come here and to live by the rules, but you have to respect what I've just said about our values. And this is our right as Europeans to ask that our values are being respected. We are not saying our values are better than other values across the globe, but it's our values. They've grown over millennia in our history, and we stick to them. And what we will do in the future will also respect these values. And I give you just one example which shows you that we take this seriously. We are not only discussing, of course, data, but we're also discussing every activity that you can do as a human being or as someone that is economically active in whatever form. And one element of that, as we all know, is identity. And we are discussing self-sovereign identity. We are discussing the principles. And our approach, which is consistent with our data approach, is that if you want to give information or data about you, The other side only needs to know the minimum, and you remain in control for it. So for example, when you go into a shop, and you want to buy alcohol or cigarettes, the only thing that the shop owner needs to know is a verification of your age. No passport, no name, no address, nothing, just red or green, 18 or older or not 18 or older. And we have the means, be that blockchain, other technologies where we can do this. If you live now in a COVID-19 environment, you want to travel, you have the discussions about the certificate, etc. When you cross the border, the policeman need not know all the details, need not know your medical record. All of this is secret, but just red or green. Have you had your vaccination, or did you have the disease in the past, or are you entitled to travel or not? The same is for each and every other activity, and we call that disposable identities. And each and every individual can have multiple disposable identities, in a sense that whatever the context is, there's a definition of the minimum data that you need to give, and then there is a technology, there's a business model, there's a mechanism that safeguards this. And this brings us to our discussion here today, because of course, what you observe in the 80% I mentioned at the beginning, this is not the situation that we're having. And this is where we try to go in that direction. We know that the trajectory is very different, but it touches the absolute fundamentals of our society. In the past, and we have a history in Europe on this, as in other parts of the world, of course, you as an individual, you are free and you engage in a sort of contract with the state. The state does certain things for you, you do certain things for the state, and it is sort of contract. And there's a lot of philosophy, as we all know, about these things. In the future, we have a triangle. We already have it now. We have the individual, we have the state, and we have the economic platforms, corporations, however you would like to phrase it. And some of them have taken the attitude that they are states. And this is something where, in my opinion, as far as I know, we have not given consent to. And I just come from a discussion I had earlier this afternoon on artificial intelligence and blockchain, where we compared the situation in China and Europe. And the argument was very often, yes, China is so much advanced because these people like technology and the Europeans don't like technology. This is, with all respect, stupid. First of all, I don't think that in Chinese they all love the technology, but I mean, there's a centralized system, without saying more to this. On the other hand side, we in Europe, and that is our experience, are not skeptical to technology, but we don't like the fact that we are disentangled from our control on data in certain current contexts where we have the feeling that we don't control our data. And this is what needs to change. And this is where all our policy levers come into play, not only innovation policy, but also competition policy, other areas that go more also in the financial domain with big stable coins, you know, the discussions. And that now brings us to the point here. Last part of the introduction from my side, one argument is faced very often, and this is the case that you don't have the enterprises in Europe. And of course, it might seem so, because unfortunately, economically speaking, technically speaking, in this area here, we have a lot of past dependency, first mover advantage, effects that play a big role in terms of network effects, etc. When you lock in your clientele, then you very easily get the power unless you are heavily controlled by competition law, which is difficult in practice, where you feel you can do what you want. And therefore, it seems that we don't have the alternatives. I can tell you from all the sources that we have plentiful of entrepreneurs in Europe. We have plentiful of innovation in Europe. We have a certain problem, which we know, which we are targeting. We're scaling that up to the last level. And this needs the involvement from all parties. And I'm very happy that today, from all the examples that we have in Europe in a broad sense, we have one very, I feel, interesting business case, which we are now discussing, which I think also embeds these principles. And I'm very happy to listen to what Urs will be saying and then engage in the discussion with you afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Joachim. A really great speech. I'm a proponent of myself of that, and you know, having worked for some of the big tech firms in the past, I do see the necessity, you know, generally to move the direction that we're moving. It's always to see that Europe leads the way on the topic, just generally on user privacy, and where other countries around the world are always kind of following suit, whether that's South Africa, whether POPI legislation, Brazil. You can see what's happening also in US, in California as well, and so on and so forth. So people do follow, you know, just generally the GDPR framework, which was the first framework that everybody's kind of abides by. And yeah, that explicit consent or active consent from the user, that world is moving. A lot of businesses, in Europe already have been kind of transitioning over the years towards this, where they need to get the consent from the user before they process any of their data. So yeah, so it's good to see. So over to then Urs again, as an example, just like you mentioned, Joachim, I also found out a fantastic example of where the industry is moving and Urs and his team are taking when it comes to kind of decoupling that data. So gonna start maybe then with you, Urs. Maybe you want to do kind of a bit of a starter on this while I'll will share the screen of your presentation.
Fantastic. So we have been starting working on this idea quite some time ago. So actually, the idea of decentralized social media platforms, I created somewhere back in 2012, and have been working on that constantly, making several pivots because it is not very easy to find the right mix from the beginning. But now we have developed a solution that we believe is now extremely well balanced. And so this is a solution where we are decentralizing the platforms in such a way that each company receives their own social media platform under their control. And the user data are not inside the platform, but the user data are outside the platform, and the user decides on which platform their data is used. And that's the decoupling. And so maybe we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, I think, Urs, feel free to take over. I think you are able to be in control of the presentation. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. So what we have as a current landscape is that all the power is concentrated in giant platforms, and it is practically impossible for new players to create a critical mass of users. And so the power is concentrated, and in this concentration is that they also control the user data and the monetization and everything around that. So what we do as an alternative is that every community, and a community is also a business and an NGO and a club, whatever, who has a reach, will operate their own social media platform. And all these platforms are interconnected. That means when one user registers on one platform, the user is automatically shared with all other platforms, but under the full and absolute control of the user. So the user can always say on which platform he doesn't want to appear and on which platform he wants to appear. So this leads to a double permission mechanism. That means the user has to say on which platform he wants to be, and the platform has to say which users they want to accept. But we go one step further. And so we create profiles, not only of people and organizations, but also of things. So actually the platform became a social media platform of things, because we create a profile from an event, from a location, from a brand, from a product, from a service. And so the users can directly engage with a brand or with a location or with a product. And this has the consequence that one user can look at the profile of a product, and then they can embed this profile into their own profile as a link. So when a friend of the user is visiting this profile of his friends, he looks up in the tabs what kind of content is in there. And so the user has listed some products of different brands. And when the user is purchasing such a product through the first user will receive automatically a revenue share, which is fully automatically distributed. And for doing that, we have integrated real money wallets in digital money. So at the moment, we take Tether at the moment. Will be open for other cryptocurrencies, but we don't want to take any classical cryptocurrency. We take a stable coin, which is because the brands will never accept a high volatility. So we use Tether, and then that means the users, they can earn money for engagement with the brands, for the brands to access the users. And so the users can use this money they have earned to purchase products. So this becomes a social commerce marketplace and becomes social selling. And as a consequence, it creates an extremely big ecosystem where everybody benefits. And I show that in the next slide. And so on one side, we are sharing the control. The platforms control the visibility of the profiles, but the user control the data. No platform has access to any user data. Only the user controls the data, and based on this data, he can be targeted. And then in addition is the platforms, they control the visibility, and the brands have the ability to access the users and to target the user, but also again with a double permission. Once with the permission of the user, and second with the permission of the platform. Because the user is choosing which platform to use. So for example, the user can choose, one user is choosing the platform McDonald's. The other user is choosing the platform of Burger King. So both users can interact with each other. They can chat with each other. They can make phone calls with each other, despite they are using different platforms. But the platform owner, which is McDonald's or Burger King, they don't have access to the user data. They only have the power to show the content of their preference to the user. The user at the McDonald's platform sees McDonald's content. The user at the Burger King platform sees Burger King platform. So the brands have the ability to do what they need to do in order to create brand awareness without being dependent on the giant platforms where they have to pay every time to go back. On the other side, the users, they are staying on the platforms, and they can interact with their friends exactly like they can do with the large platforms. They can connect, they can chat, they can call, they can make posts, they can stream a video, they can even have the video that they stream to get sponsors by a brand. And they can also send money because they have an integrated wallet. And this comes a next point, which is very important, is the users only earn money when they have a wallet. They only get a wallet when they are identified. So what we do is, we as a system, as an ecosystem provider, we do not operate a wallet. What we do is we integrate wallet partners, such as payment providers, such as banks, which are providing their wallets to the users of the ecosystem. And this based on the jurisdiction. And this means that a user in one jurisdiction will maybe have 20 options, and then he will use one wallet provider of his choice. But for doing that, he has to be identified. And this means on the other side is now an advertiser always have access to a real user. The advertiser directly pays the user for clicking on an advertisement. So instead of the advertiser paying the platform, the advertiser pays the user, and the platform owner receives a revenue share for enabling this service. And this money goes directly from wallet to wallet, from user to user. And at the same time, the revenue is fairly shared. And so that's how we distribute control. Now, the controls don't work so well. Okay, so with the wallet is a typical wallet that people know from the blockchain space. This is it's a crypto wallet because we are supporting microtransactions. So a user can earn 20 cents from clicking an advertisement, but at the same time, a friend who brought the user to the platform receives a revenue share as an introducer of 0.1%. So he receives a very tiny amount, which is not zero. It sums up over time. And so the users can earn money for a lot of activities on the platform. And that's the ecosystem that we have enabled. And this is social commerce. And control is distributed. And there is another quite important element on this. So I have said that we are integrating financial partners as wallet providers. Another element is because the user is verified. We don't care what the user is doing when he's not unverified, because the abilities, what he can do is limited. So the users which want to get access to the system, they need to get verification. They don't need to get it immediately, but they can do that after some time. But once they have a jurisdiction because they have a place of residence. And now what we do is we apply local law and local taxes to the local user. And therefore we create a justice of tax between the countries. And this is a quite important thing for the future, because this is fairness. This is exactly what Joachim was mentioning in the opening. And then another element is we are giving the users the ability to rate other users. So we have 3 indexes. One is an activity index. This is more for gamification. It's more for fun. So one user can compare himself with another user, whether he or she is more active on the platform. But then we have a trust index. And the trust index means when somebody is saying something bad and about another person, the trust index, the other person can put this user at 0. And when one user is doing a lot of nonsense, he receives a lot of strong rates from his environment, which is negative. And this will put his content visibility at 0. So his content is not visible anymore. So the users have to earn visibility from being nice with their network. And so we don't create the rules. We make the users to create the rules, how they want to behave with each other. And this also depends on the platform, on the circles where the users interact. And then we have added another index. This is the social index. The social index is measuring how strong a user is adapting to sustainability. If a user doesn't care, okay. If a user cares, he can create visibility and he can create recognition and he can make his social index to increase. And the same with the companies. So users can rate companies for their sustainability. And if a lot of users are rating one company badly because of a bad perceived sustainability, their social index goes down, which means that a lot of users might not use this company anymore for their purchases. So that's in a nutshell what we do as a system, and it's decentralized and democratized. So we want to have as little impact to the interaction between the users as possible. And to this end, we create rules, because we have to create rules how the users have to interact. But we do this, we place these rules like a constitution as a starting point. And now we hand over these rules to the public. So we make the users to vote on future changes of these rules as a social media constitution on the platform. And with that, I would like to give back to Frank and to open discussion.
Fantastic, really great presentation, Urs, and I'm also a big believer that this is where the industry is moving. Among you, there are so many companies that sprung up also around this area that support, the user privacy. While you were talking, there were a few questions that we have now coming in. First question, which we kind of touched upon, what is the overarching benefit of decentralization? Maybe Joachim is something that you can take or maybe recap.
Yes. I feel that there's a lot of benefits from decentralization because there's a lot of unused potential at the, I would say, lowest is not a good word, at the lower level of regions, of enterprises, small enterprises. 98% of our enterprises are small enterprises, small and medium-sized enterprises, the majority of them micro enterprises. And a very big problem that they face is, I would say, three things. First of all, access to markets, access to finance, and then the big problem of scaling because of fixed costs that are involved with their everyday activities. And these things are related because a lot of that has to do with data. It's a question of getting access to the right channels, giving the right data and information, but only that you want to know to give to your target group, but also have the ability to move data. And this data portability is a very important aspect of the whole discussion. Because the fact that you govern your data, that you have the right to do so, does not only mean that you control to whom you give what, but also that it can be transferred, that it can be deleted, that it can be changed according to your needs and according to your business models. And all of that are very time-consuming issues. And the combination of the technology that we now have with the business cases, as the example that we've just discussed and that Urs has presented, give you the ability to do actually at each level of the economy, basically in real time and basically at next to zero cost, because that is what technologies like distributed ledger technologies and others enable us to do. And this is suddenly the game changer where the competitiveness that at the moment the bigger entities have is at the same time possible for the smaller entities that are in a position to compete. And what we observe is that this creativity is already emerging basically everywhere, but that the limits in order to compete for the smaller ones with the bigger ones are not in the business model. They are not in the technology, but they're mainly then that the bigger ones have the resources to resort to other activities like anti-competitive behavior or lobbying or things like that that prevent, let's say, new innovative things to emerge. And that is wasteful in a social dimension. In a social dimension, the productive use is the self-determined interest of the person, but not in a sense of narrow neoclassical economics where we are all identical. That's exactly the thing, that we are not identical. We are not atomistic parts, but we are all different. And we now have the technologies and the ability to express ourselves in every environment that we want, whether that's a business environment, a social environment, a private environment. That's the same principles according to our needs and, frankly, regardless of the social perception of others, unless we voluntarily engage in a club or a platform like Urs has been mentioning. And then, of course, there are social mechanisms in place that control for this. And this, in a sense, is in the future at the same time decentralized and global, which is fascinating because we have two big trends that we observe for the moment. One is towards a very globalized development in terms of what our activities will be, and at the same time, the decentralization in terms of control and access. And this is no contradiction because both can exist at the same time. Your economic activity is not disconnected from your social activity and your other activities. And social means that it can be anyone. It can be your neighbor, it can be a person in Australia, it can be a person wherever. And you meet in this digital space where you have the control. That is the big point in part where I would say there is not one benefit in this, but basically it's nothing else than an expression of who you are as a person and what your beliefs and activities are. And that's the essence of human being.
Fantastic. Looking at other questions that we have coming right now as well, considering the platforms that are out there for users to move from sort of one social environment to any other sort of environment is really a major challenge out there, right? You have your friends, your colleagues, etc. in particular environments, and then switching to anything else is usually a hurdle from a user standpoint. And this is one of the reasons maybe why also platforms, major platforms back in the days like Google Plus have failed as a result of that, because other platforms, all your friends were there. Why would you ever, exist and do the same things in another platform when they kind of looked and feel the same, really? So why taking the path of decentralization kind of would ensure success? So kind of, thinking long term, I think this is going to take a few years for us to kind of move towards this direction. But from a user standpoint, what do you believe maybe Joachim and Nordis, what would be maybe the kind of the key reasons why users would move away from one platform to another? Is it legislation that will move this? So what
in a sense, Frank, I hesitate saying that legislation is the driver, because I think that the dog wags with the tail and not the tail with the dog. It should not be regulation that forces people to do certain things. It should be an enabler. Regulation or laws are always an enabler. My personal feeling on this is, yes, it is a problem, and that is why we work on certain things like data transferability and really the technologies to enable these things, and also to give this a legal framework that it is possible. But most of that is enshrined in human behavior. And I observed that when all these social media came about, first it was the internet, the social media, the new form of communication. And I must say, but this is my very personal experience, I am not active on any form of social media whatsoever, not even on LinkedIn, because it belongs to certain companies and other things as well. And I've always been told that this is a killer in terms of professional environment, because people only find you on these platforms. I can tell you that I find everybody finds me. And when I go to excursions with friends and we sit there for a day or so and we travel around, there are people that spend 90% of the time that they're actually in the same room with others, by making photos, putting that on social platform, demonstrating, hey, I'm here, I'm eating this, I'm drinking this, I'm having a good time. The only thing that they don't do is talk to each other, but they are supposed to be friends and be together. I feel that whereas in the past we have been too much constrained by the lack of technological opportunities, we had a period where we were overshooting in the other direction, where we tried all of that out because it's so nice. And now there is a movement back to what I consider as reasonable standards. And that is, interestingly enough, much facilitated and accelerated by COVID-19. Because I think we're getting back to some forms of essentials. We are realizing of what are the core values, what is our freedom, what is the value of these things. We realize that when we have contacts with few people, we welcome that, we cherish that because it's important, but we are losing a bit, I feel, of this superficiality that we have in this environment. And therefore, the bottom line for me, to answer to your question, is the behavioral aspect, which is also, of course, linked a lot to education and experience. And that is why we're putting so much effort into education, of just informing people about not only what their rights are, but what are the opportunities, what are the existing business models, what are the alternatives actually of what you're only seeing. Because at the end of the day, when you really want to be progressive, when you really want to pursue your interests and you find an app or you find an interesting solution to that, you will probably not find that in the XX Play Store or in the whatever, because this again is a closed shop where they like to keep things together. And don't have the fallacy of believing that when you are on such a huge platform, you are a free person. You are as free and can have as many followers as you like. The moment that you say one wrong word concerning the business case of that, you are deplatformed and then you are out. So the only way of finding your freedom, your right for expression and your economic activities is the decentralized aspect we are discussing here. And that is something that more and more people understand from themselves and not because lawmakers are telling them so.
Yeah, makes sense. And Urs, from your perspective, would you say that the financial incentive for the user would be maybe one of the drivers, what that will make them, to switch the platforms?
Yes and no. We hear a lot from many people that the financial incentive is not good enough, because they say, oh, how much money can I earn? Oh, I can earn 20 cents per click. Oh, that's not so much. How much can I earn per month? Oh, this is nothing compared to my salary. Yes, but we believe at the end it will still create a role because out of gamification. What makes you to spend 2 hours in a row with a car racing game? It's gamification. And there on this car race, you earn diamonds or wheels or whatever. And with our system, you earn real money as a gamification element. And I believe it at the end, once people discover the system, they will appreciate, and then this will help to scale. But this is not the initial moment that the users will come over to the platform. The initial moment is a value given by a brand. Because the brands, they offer something that the users like, and this brand value usually has been developed over decades. So the customers, they appreciate these brand values and they want to use brand platforms, but on these brand platforms, they cannot interact. And so they go to the social media giants to interact. And so the brands need to chase their customers back to the social media platforms where they have to pay access fee, like a bridge toll. And this bridge toll becomes more expensive every month. So brands, every year, brands have to pay more to access their own existing customers. So with our system, the brands bring their existing customers to their own social media platform according to their own brand values. And the users will come because of that, but they will stay because they can meet their friends. And they will return not because of the brand, they will return for checking their messages that they have received from friends. And the messages come from cross platforms, but they have to choose one platform as a host, as a home platform. And this can be any platform. This can be Deutsche Bahn. This can be a retailer. This can be an airline. This can be a fashion outlet. This can be anybody can create their own platform, and they get the customers based on their brand value. But the users stay because of their friends, and they return on a daily basis because of their friends. And this is an opportunity for the brands to engage with the customers. And for that, and the beauty for that is, the brands don't need to own the user data. That's the absolute biggest beauty about that. The user owns the data, and the user tells when he or she wants to give whom access to his or her data. So the system we have developed is absolutely free of advertisement, but users can opt in to get advertisement. And when they opt in, they're getting paid for being disturbed. And this is then the gamification. And so we through that, we create a circle of engagement where everybody benefits. The brand, which brings the users to the platform, benefits. The user benefits from content and richness and income and whatever. And the advertiser also benefits. So, and the influencers massively benefit, because on the social media platforms, the influencer gets no, or if they get some, they get a relatively low revenue share compared to what the platforms earn. With the system that we have developed, with the automatic revenue share, the influencer doesn't need to showcase sponsors anymore, because sponsors are automatically integrated, and the influencer earns money by being authentic. While on the other platforms, the influencer is forced to promote the brand. He actually does, in many cases, he doesn't even know. And so this is a paradoxum. And so it's a combination of many elements which makes the users to join. And so when I look at, for me, it's always, it was amazing to see how Google Plus developed, and they developed to more than 500 million users, which is a very big number that many others don't achieve. And they decided to shut it down because it was too close to another platform. So when a platform wants to scale, it has to be different from anything existing to attract the users. This is one element. And the other element is it has to share value. Only when the value is shared, others are willing to contribute to make this to happen, to grow.
Yeah, that makes sense. And this is why we're seeing also over the last maybe year or two that there are new big players that do come kind of to the game in the social media space, where users do transition from some of the biggest platforms over to kind of secondary or tertiary kind of platforms where they find other users with similar values. So Urs, would you say that in order for sort of this transition to see it happen, kind of speed up, really, do brands have to follow first for this to become a reality sooner than later?
Yes, actually, so we are talking with brands to help them to increase their marketing efficiency. Because actually what we do is, when a brand currently makes an advertising campaign, they pay the platforms, and the platforms are reaching their users. So in many cases, these users are up to 20% or maybe even more on some platforms, fake users. Because in the last 10 years, there was a huge crime industry developed out of fraud from ad clicks. And we can prevent that with the verified users. And
yeah, I think the biggest incident as well of that is Uber. I think that happened where several millions of dollars were reported in ad fraud. So yeah, I mean, that the aspect of advertising, there's definitely also an issue there, right? That with the big kind of tech firms, the ad fraud is still prevalent, and there are these what I call invalid clicks happening all around the world. Whether that's click farms keep popping up, etc. So yeah, that is definitely one of the trends. So yeah, fantastic. So in terms of other questions that we have coming in, so for brands to really move away from walled gardens is a major undertaking, really, and a significant risk of not being able to address a big part of the audience kind of anywhere else. What do companies such as DISEO help to mitigate that risk? What is so yeah, that's pretty much the question from the user. How will you mitigate the risk of, I guess, of that transition? Because that it is a risk, right, for brands to
exactly.
from one platform to another.
So it's a risk that the brand has existing followers on the large platforms, and they are afraid that they would not follow to their own platform. And but this is something which can be done in a continuous way over time. So it can still continue in a dual approach, that the brand is still continuing to make the campaigns on the large platforms, but then they are attracting the core users of their own platform, and so they can drive benefit over time. The big value comes from user engagement, because a user on an own brand platform has a much deeper interaction than on a giant social platform. One example for that is Nike. Nike has managed, I think they are still the biggest one, they're still the biggest monobrand as an app. And they have managed to create a critical mass of users, which is absolutely amazing. And they have driven that. And this is the value they have created. And the same every other brand can also do, but they need a significant effort for doing that. And but Nike shows that it's valuable to do that effort. And we help the companies to do such a thing and to have their own platform without investment costs. They just continue to have their own budget. They just allocate it differently.
Okay. A question that comes from the DISEO app addressed to you, Urs, in particular, is so you say, Urs, that the platform is decentralized and democratized, but the user understands that this applies to the content shared on the platform, but the platform technically is centralized. So is that correct or not?
This is, at the moment, it's correct, because we have built it from a traditional way, because I have been looking at all these blockchain initiatives very carefully. And the problem is, if you do that with a new approach, it's very difficult to scale. So we have developed this model that, that is a kind of mix between traditional way and a new way with using decentralization. And we are adding more and more steps to it to make it fully decentralized over time. So we don't want to break in and to make something fully different from the very beginning. So we want to give the users the ability to get a user experience which is the same as they already used to have. And then we will be educating the user step by step into decentralization, because this is a new paradigm. The user needs to get used to it. So we have different elements that we're going to decentralize and putting onto the blockchain. So the first element, which is already on the blockchain, are the wallets. So the cryptocurrencies are with the wallets. Then at the moment, the trust index is traditional. That will be another one that we will put onto the blockchain. And then also the revenue share. The revenue share is also something that we will apply by blockchain. So we'll step by step, we'll add more and more elements to be fully decentralized.
Okay, fantastic. The other question that just I was seeing from the audience, and that's addressed to you, Joachim, by the looks of it. Who controls and supervises the rules of all decentralized platforms, and how?
We have a setup of national and European regulators. The normal concept is that we have national, start differently. We have two approaches at the European level. Either we go for a complete harmonization, or we go for a more flexible approach where we set certain rules and then they can be implemented with certain varieties according to the national level. Without going into the details there, it means in both cases that you have a national regulator in place and a European network. And for example, if I take GDPR, I could take any other element that we have been discussing. This has been implemented at the national level according to the principles, and then these people are working together coherently in a coordinating group at European level, and they have bodies also to sanction behavior. And for a lot of time, that has not really kicked off, but the examples are increasing over the last weeks, actually, where in terms of apps and applications of apps and platforms, this is now kicking off in order to demonstrate that indeed we mean it. And that's the only way of how it works. And there I can encourage you, for example, to look at the data of the European Data Protection Board or others where such cases are being mentioned. What you need to realize in terms of GDPR, that there is a maximum level of 4% of your turnover, which can be a fine in case that you breach it. In competition law, we have in certain instances a 10% threshold, as many of our current and future listeners will probably know from their enterprises from own experience. And this is something that we take seriously. And the bottom line of that is, and that you will also see from that practice, is that at the beginning, it's a lenient approach. It's an approach of cautioning, of informing, etc. After a certain while, you are expected to live up by the rules. And you are expected to live by the rules not only as a private entity, but also as a public entity. And we have these cases where, for example, schools, to mention just one example, are obliging their pupils to use certain apps which are not in compliance with general data protection regulation. And we have recently the first cases where such schools have been sanctioning for wrong protocol and wrong behavior. And this is kicking off. So you better take this seriously, because the transition period is over. And there's so much information around. What shocks me personally most is actually that those that are in the biggest need of understanding the rules are very often left alone in terms of understanding them. The small enterprises that I spoke about, or the individual school or the individual authority as such at a local level, normally does not have the resources to follow all of that in detail of what we are discussing here. And that is why it needs information, it needs intermediation, it needs also information platforms and government activities in order to make people aware of what this actually means, because this is something that is to stay, and as I've explained with e-identity, also to increase in other areas. So it's not something that you sit out, which a lot of people actually thought. When GDPR came about in 2016 and we had a 2-year deadline in order to implement that, we started 4 weeks before the end of the transition period getting very worried calls from a lot of entities that this deadline is coming up. I'm sorry, you knew that for 2 years, and then you can discuss certain things. But that is also my message to the audience here. This is not something where we will buckle down. This is not something where we will give in. This is something where we feel, and as you've mentioned it, Frank, where we see a lot of traction also outside Europe, not because we think that we are smarter than other parts of the world. No, absolutely not at all. But we feel that there are large parts of the world that think as we do, that indeed there are these benefits in the decentralization. And in my understanding, perhaps to wrap this up from my part, once all this digitalization started, and once the first cryptocurrencies came about and the blockchain community, and now everything that we see in terms of innovation, it was to be an alternative to the legacy system. And we must not remain hijacked by the legacy system, by them taking control again because they sit this out, or they control the lobby groups, or they make pressure, or they punish people, or whatever. We push this through. And therefore, you need to inform yourselves about these things and accommodate for that. I'm fully with us as regards the principles for the transition, which is the big issue. And that is why in our legislation and regulation, we are very open, for example, for people that are centralized to come in, and we accompany them to get more and more decentralized. We are not so naive to think that all of that needs to come from the startup, because yes, scaling is a big problem. So it needs to come from two sides. It needs to come from bottom up, but also it needs to come from the reasonable players on top that understand these principles and then try step by step to decentralize. And if these two things come together, then we end up where we want to end up.
And final question, maybe before we close off the webinar, will be again addressed to you, Joachim. So the question is as follows. So Americans are increasingly disturbed by the exploitative model by the big social media companies, whereby the users are effectively the products. So usually says, you know, if something is free, you're the product usually, right? So, and I think that the values that Joachim articulates, including favoring decentralization, will resonate with the majority of US residents. So hence the question, would you, Joachim, consider democratization of information a shared value between the EU and the US?
Absolutely. And I'm very grateful for the question, because even though we also take this from an industrial or competitiveness perspective, policy perspective, this is not confrontative. This is not Europe against US or America or Asia or whatsoever. This is a question of each and every person, and we respect choices. If someone takes the choice voluntarily to be happy with the current situation, be free to do so. The others need to be given the opportunity, and I see a lot of traction for that in the US. I hear that every day in my discussions and my experience. To me, it's the core values of why this country was created at a certain moment in time, but that is only my very personal opinion. I heard today in a different context that actually also in certain Asian countries, certainly in China and others, there's also more diversity than we see on the surface. And for example, when there are food scandals or whatever, that people seem to be getting more and more assertive on social platforms to also put pressure on their municipalities and their decision makers. At the end of the day, it's the control of your life. And I feel personally this, but this is again my personal opinion, these are universal values. At the end of the day, you are born as an individual, you are born free, you are born as the only person that can really make you going into your life and make you the person that you want to become. And this is what we want to enable. We tell no one what the value system is. I've spoken not one word about political beliefs. I have my political beliefs, you have yours, and there's a big likelihood that they are not compatible. At the end of the day, no one cares, because we live in one place where we need to have the opportunity to express that and to have some tolerance also for the other values. And I have my tolerance for other business models. The only thing that I ask is if we want to accommodate ours and scale that up as an alternative, we have the right to do so. We do so.
Fantastic. Really great response, and yeah, I hear similar things as well in a lot of my discussions. That US wants to follow suit, right, on a lot of the aspects of data privacy as well. And again, probably there it's more about it's not if but when that will happen, right? Because we've seen the legislation in California. We're seeing we believe other states as well in the US will probably follow suit. Yeah, it was great, definitely a fruitful, I believe, discussion, plenty of questions. So appreciate from the audience as well, getting those questions. So feel free to connect with myself if you want on LinkedIn. I'm actually there. Joachim isn't there. I know that Urs is still on LinkedIn available. But yeah, I really appreciate Joachim and Urs for joining the webinar, and otherwise wishing you a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.